Hey, everybody. So welcome to House Calls, the podcast. Matt, we made a mistake in our last episode.
We?
Well, I did.
Okay.
We were talking about, in What the Ruck, we were talking about fitness, aging, and the weighted vest. And I mentioned that you're supposed to get between 100 and 200 minutes of zone 2 cardio. And I said 100 hours. And unfortunately, one of my cousins who is very competitive. We kind of made, I think most people got it that we meant 100 minutes because I think we said like, oh, that's like little over 30-minute walks or a long hike on the weekend. Well, this poor guy is so competitive. He's been doing 100 hours of working out for the week. So that means that he has to work out 14 hours a day. The poor guy's only been sleeping 4 hours a night.
And the guy's 83 years old. I mean, if anybody could do it, it would be him. And I don't know
He's still
if
in his 50s, but he's the geezer.
Are you serious? Wait a second. Wait, are you serious about the 50? Wow. And
so this is how it's relevant to this is that I think there's some people in my family who have a competition problem, and I will admit that I have not tamed the beast. Can we say that? I'm working on it.
Are you working on it?
I'm trying to.
Okay.
I didn't throw my club when we played golf this weekend.
That's true. That's true. You pouted.
But
okay.
Tonight's guest is Dr. Dominique Pichard, right?
Yes.
Kevin Colleton's wife.
Correct.
And the reason that's relevant is, first thing, she actually in the text message said phonetically how we should say her name correctly. And clearly I know her family, and that was not meant for you. That was meant because I have a tendency to mispronounce names.
Well, I think there's another family in Sherwood that would like to talk to you about that too.
Yes. Sorry, Rowan.
Apologies. Apologies, Rowan, Dave, Janet, Brady.
So the other thing though was in our episode with Kevin, you said at least twice, and I thought you would edit it out, that she was smarter than all three of us combined.
I stand by that.
And so I, as a competitive person, and I want to run this by you first before we run it by her, but I was like, all three of us combined? Really? I think that we would have a chance. So what I did was I made a basically like Jeopardy style trivia game.
Okay.
But I didn't want the questions to be unfair. So I used AI to come up or the chat GPT to come up with the categories. And I thought that since this is going to be head to head, theoretically, it could be you and me versus her. And then we could phone a friend, and that would be Kevin, to prove is she smarter than all three of us combined. But I came up with the categories. I wanted to do science and medicine because we're both doctors. I want to go history. I want to go sports, arts, and entertainment. And those were the categories. So I put it into ChatGPT, and I came up with, and this is great. We're both doctors, me and Dominique. So for medicine, it came up with complex fractures and dislocations of the wrist.
That's
great topic. Really interesting. Good.
Yeah.
For sports, it came up with Earl Campbell and the 1980s Houston Oilers.
Was this Ty's ChatGPT?
For music, it came up with the greatest hits of David Allan Coe. And for history, it came up with the career and presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. So I am feeling pretty confident that I'm going to prove that I'm smart as hell. Or do you just want to give me the victory right now and we'll leave Dominique out of this?
I think we're good. I don't think Dominique could, hang with you in any of those categories. And I love it was just fair and unbiased the way those ChatGPT just ran those. That's just the algorithm. I mean, it is what it is. And man, oh man, you're just knowledgeable in so many areas. I don't know how we would ever compete.
So in all seriousness, we're excited to hear about Dominique's journey and her involvement with the Rets Foundation.
Absolutely. She has both a personal and professional connection to Rett syndrome, and I'm excited to have her share it with all of us and explain it in better detail than you and I can.
And like every episode in general, we would love for you, if you know somebody who might be interested in this, to like the episode, to share the episode, but particularly this one, we would want you to share it to bring about awareness and fundraising for Rets. There is a charity. There's about to be a pig roast in our community, so there's ways to give money. And we will put that in the Instagram announcements. We'll put it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We'll put it in the description of the episode, right?
Yep. There'll be a link. There'll be a link for you to donate directly to the Reds Foundation.
Okay. So we're excited.
We're excited. Let's meet Dominique. Okay.
Hey everybody, so welcome to House Calls the podcast. Tonight we have Dr. Dominique Pichard. After we sent the correct phonetic spelling and we joked about it in the previous intro.
Only
and
known her 40 years, so we're finally getting that
Yes.
name. We're getting close to it.
Dominique is a physician and is very involved with the Rets Foundation. So we are really excited to hear about her journey, starting off with childhood all the way to what she's doing now.
Dominique, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to hang out with us tonight, and we're excited to really learn more about you and learn more about what's going on. So thank you.
Thrilled to be here with you guys.
So we had an episode this weekend where somebody, because Matt and I do a podcast together, assumed that Matt was a doctor.
True.
And Matt immediately corrected him and said, I'm not a doctor. And I just thought that was an incredible sign of maturity, because the old Matt would have gone on and on about his medical career and 100%. How he was chief of whatever at Hopkins, and it would have been epic. And Matt just flat out told the kid, was like, yeah, I'm not a doctor.
Said, congratulations, Matt. You're growing up.
It's a big day. I said I play one on a podcast. That's about it.
But our standard question for people who are doctors is, did you always know you wanted to be a doctor, or how did it come to you?
I did. And I think I probably have a little bit of a revisionist history, because when I talk about when I wanted to be a doctor, my older sister's like, no, you didn't. Like, that's not true. And I'm like, yes, it is. So my current story that I tell myself, is when I was a young kid, my friends used to call me Dr. Dom. So there was at some point I had said I wanted to be a doctor, and everyone kind of accepted that. And from, in my mind, like 8, 9, 10 on, that was going to be my career path. And there were a lot of people that told me don't do it, and that just fueled me more. Did they call you Dr. Dom because they assumed, or were you actually giving medical advice? I'm sure I always said I wanted to, like, I don't even know why they called me Dr. Dom. Maybe I put Band-Aids on better than everyone else. Like, I don't know. I did have that bike accident when I was 7, and was in the hospital, had multiple surgeries, and then was in a brace for years, because I lost the lateral malleolus in my left leg. Maybe kind of through that experience, I then decided I could play doctor. I don't know. Like I didn't walk around with a white coat and a stethoscope. And your dad's a doctor. And it is funny how people, when your dad's a doctor, my dad was a doctor, people ask you doctor questions, like hurt and there's no adult around. They go the doctor's kid first.
I think that's interesting, because I do remember that horrific accident. And I really thought your experience there was what propelled you to want to be a doctor. When did you realize what kind of doctor you wanted to be?
I knew that I wanted to be, I would say it was throughout medical school, when you are exploring different things. I wanted to be able to spend time with patients. I had shadowed surgeons, and I was like, those patients are mostly asleep and you're just fixing things. That's not my thing. And at the summer after my first year of medical school, I worked with a pediatric oncologist, Aziza Shah, at Georgetown. And I was helping her set up what they call a late effects clinic. So all these pediatric oncology patients were now surviving, and surviving long enough to now have effects from their oncology treatments. So either a second cancer or heart disease, because the drug impacts their heart functioning. And no one was studying it because these kids hadn't lived before. So there was this trend to start these late effects clinics. And so I was helping her set it up. So I spent that summer in the pediatric oncology clinic. And that's when I was like, that's it. I'm going to be at a pediatric oncologist with long-term follow-up of adult survivors. So summer after my first year of medical school, I was like, okay, I've got my career path set out. I'm going to go do internal medicine and pediatrics combined, because if I'm going to follow these kids as adult survivors, I better know how to treat them as an adult. And then I will do my pediatric oncology training after that. So that was the plan, after first year of med school.
And what happened?
Yes. Clearly, that's not where I am.
I will go back to college when you were pre-med, but I want to hear the story.
So I specifically chose my residency at the University of Minnesota because they had the most established late effects clinic in their pediatric oncology division. And the head of pediatric oncology was kind of the leader in the children's oncology group. And so it was a really great place for that training. So we moved to Minneapolis. At the time, Catalina was 6 months old when I started my intern year. And I did this internal medicine pediatrics residency. Well, when Kat was 13 months old, which was January of my intern year, you get like, I don't know, 8 days off your entire intern year. And so we decided to go to Chile to visit my grandmother and my family down there and take Catalina there. So we fly to Chile, we land, and that night she got the most miserable stomach bug. So the entire 8 days that we're in Chile, there's stuff coming out every which end. Get back to Minneapolis, I'm like back on some miserable rotation, working 100 hours a week. And my nanny's like, she's not talking anymore. And I was like, yeah, she's been sick. Leave her be. Turns out she had actually lost her verbal language. She'd had her regression. And so I started then going through the workup. So I would come home from my 36-hour shifts, go to medical appointments with her, or go to therapy with her, and while we're trying to figure out what's going on. But at that moment, I'd said, there's very few things that make you lose language. And I was in internal medicine and pediatrics. Right. I had pediatric well child care clinics. So I knew what normal development was. And so I said, I think she has Rett syndrome. And I can tell you the rest of that story, but just then fast forward 2 years later when I'm doing my applications for pediatric oncology. And in fact, at the University of Minnesota, they wanted to start the first combined pediatric adult hematology oncology fellowship. And they wanted me to be the inaugural fellow for that. So it was only going to be 5 more years of training, and I would only have to be board certified in 6 different things. And I was I'd spent so much time in pediatric oncology through my residency, and I just saw the life of these pediatric oncologists. And I think it was probably Kevin who was like, I'm not sure this is the path that we can take in this family, And he was like, these fellows, they literally like would sleep on their patients' floors in the transplant unit, and and go to their patients' birthday parties and graduations and funerals. Like it is so all encompassing and really high burnout rate in pediatric oncology.
Sure. Oh, I can't imagine.
And certainly there's a high burnout rate with complex chronic special needs. And it took me a while to finally realize that was not going to be my career path. Like I was going to burn out either in my career or my family. And, that wasn't really an option to burn out in my family. So it was really hard because I had been on this path and to figure out what should I do with my life. Like I felt like I was nothing without pediatric oncology. And I had a really awesome program director who was like, look, take time to figure out, change up your rotations. He let me switch out some of my bone marrow transplant oncology rotations I had set up to do other types of internal medicine pediatric subspecialties.
Just to clarify, so your residency was in pediatrics?
It's a combined internal medicine and pediatrics. So you finish and you're board eligible in both. 4 years of that,
and then you're choosing 4 years of that, and then you're choosing your fellowship.
Yes.
And then, so Catalina she got diagnosed in your intern year?
She got ultimately we finally got the diagnosis beginning of my second year.
Okay.
When I was 4 months pregnant with Tomas.
And how old was she when she stopped talking?
13 months is when she lost her verbal language.
She was talking.
She had 7 words.
Yeah. Okay.
So she was tracking normally in terms of language development, but literally lost it. Like never really said a word after that.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one of my best friends from medical school, had kind of a roundabout path after her medical school, and she was in dermatology, and she was like, you should do this. And I was like, I'm not going from saving kids to like doing filler.
Right.
Like, That ain't my style. That's not why I went into medicine. I'm not, that was just not my passion. And she was like, no, it's so much more. And she convinced me, to at least give it a shot. And so then I did a dermatology rotation and found, there is kind of an area, quite a bit of research, complex medical dermatology that I really enjoyed. And so then I applied for a dermatology residency and switched into that field.
And it's really hard to get into, mostly because the lifestyle is better, right? Like there's not many dermatology emergencies in the middle of the night. But it's incredibly challenging to get into, like to get a spot in dermatology. Is dermatology 3 years? So it's 4 years of med school, 4 years of residency, dermatology for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then.
Well, and there was a little kicker when when I finished, I actually did 3 years of my med peds because I left a year early because of this switch. I was 8 months pregnant with with Francisca, my third, when I was finishing up my third year and would be starting my derm residency. And they were like, look, you just can't start 2 months late. And so I ended up just doing a research year that year. So I added a research year and then started my derm residency with a, 1-year-old, 2.5-year-old, and 4-year-old.
Which is just incredible.
That is nuts.
Residency is hard enough, and then doing it pregnant and with toddlers takes determination.
What kind of feedback were you getting from people that are going, "You're nuts. What are you doing?" And knowing you, that probably motivated you even more.
Yeah, I don't like to hear, you can't do this. When I went in my med peds residency, it was just kind of like, this is what you do. I mean, Kevin was working at Target. Actually, when we started my intern year, he was still consulting. So he was gone Monday through Thursday, and I was gone Sunday to Sunday, so we had a live-in nanny. And I said to him, I was like, you can't be gone all the time. And so he switched to the job at Target, which was great because it gave him a lot more flexibility. He would bring the kids, he would bring Catalina in to the hospital on the weekends. And it was just okay in Minnesota because they're much more family friendly. Then I moved to DC for my derm residency at Georgetown. We're like, you're going to suck it up and work just as hard as the rest of us.
Dom, let me ask you, do you consider yourself more of a scientist or a doctor? Because I just think about all the stuff that you've done, and I don't know that if there is a real big difference, but I feel like you do the research, you're behind the scenes and you're testing and stuff. I think you're more of a scientist than a doctor. Is that fair?
I always professionally when I'm talking, I say I'm a physician scientist. Because when I went into medicine, I thought what I wanted was to be there in the clinic, holding the person's hand, letting them cry on my shoulder, helping them through their medical problems, like that true, I'm your doctor. I had briefly considered family medicine and, primary care. And I love those interactions, but I'm also fueled by kind of answering questions. And I actually, before medical school, I was going to do an MD PhD in neuroscience and really decided I should work in the lab before I commit to that path because it's a long path. And so I ended up doing a master's in neurophysiology and realized in the first semester that I absolutely hated that culture and just didn't want to be kind of stuck in that. Usually that's like a 7-year PhD program. So I kind of had said, well, I really am just going to be with the patients and not do the research. I was turned off by that. So I just consider myself a physician scientist.
That's great.
And now to backtrack, just because I might have missed this, in college, you played field hockey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very busy playing field hockey plus being pre-med.
Yeah.
Did that help you at all later on with just life is busy, I'm used to being busy? Did you get any lessons out of that?
I think it was just who I am. in high school, they would call me the Energizer Bunny. You know, I was like always back to back. Like I would get up before school and run 6 miles. Then I would go to school, and then I would go to 3 different sports. And then I would come home at 10 p.m. and do my homework. And I would be making coffee in the middle of the night while my parents thought I was sleeping, because I would be pulling all-nighters to get my work done. And then I would just
Do it again.
get up at 5:30 and run the next day, you know. And like I was always the kid showing up to prom with wet hair because I was just coming from a sports practice, and I probably changed in the car, you know, on my way from the gym to, you know, wherever we were going. So it was just, that was just my personality. And so it probably helped me handle being at Penn, pre-med, and playing, you know, Division I field hockey and club ice hockey, and being a co-ed fraternity, and being a writing advisor. And I taught in both a high school and an elementary school while I was in college, you know, so that was just kind of who I was.
Holy cow.
Ty, pick your chin up. Pick your chin up.
Yeah.
See, Ty, I knew a lot of this stuff, and so I was smart enough not to ask because I knew a lot of that already. I'm like, I'm not showing up. Yeah.
So are we going to do a whole nother episode on the ice hockey career of Dominique?
Yeah.
Because that is a whole thing. And Kevin played ice hockey also. So did you guys meet on the rink?
We did not meet on the rink. When we met, he found out I played ice hockey. And so he was like, oh, can I come to your ice hockey game? I was pledging this co-ed fraternity that he was hanging out with. So he and one of the other guys from the fraternity showed up at my, I'm sure it was like an 8 a.m. Sunday game, because we got the worst time slots.
There you go.
So, and I was like, they're committed.
Yeah, that's dedication.
So he came and showed up at my hockey game to watch.
I want to get back to the career and the and motherhood.
Yeah.
So you're finished your training, and now where do you work?
All right. So I finished. So during my last year of derm residency, I did a 1-month rotation at NIH in their dermatology branch. And I fell in love. I was like, I found my place. I mean, this was what I had pictured in terms of working with complex patients, being involved in research. It was just such a stimulating environment. Like, I loved it. I mean, I spent that month, and it was like hard to pull me out of work. And so I said, like, I want to work here, and was really fortunate that I had the support of the staff there, and they were able to create a position for me. So when I finished my derm residency, I then went to the NIH to work as a clinical researcher.
Well, so you finished your residency. How old are all 3 kids at that point?
So I finished residency. They were 6, 4, and 2.5.
Okay. So, and just jumping all around. So Kat was diagnosed when she was 2?
Yep, she was 20 months old.
20 months old. And so at 13 months old, that's when you first start seeing some signs of the regression. Mm-hmm. And so now you're 4 years later, basically. What are you doing as a scientist, as a physician, what are you doing to figure out what's going on with my child, and how can I help her down her path?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and it's interesting, when she was first diagnosed, when I was in Minneapolis, one of the doctors that I worked with, who worked in the kind of neuro rehab hospital where a lot of the Rett kids were seen, because they had a Rett clinic there. And he said to me, he was like, this is great. When you finish, you can be the Rett doctor. And I mean, I had just gotten her diagnosis.
Right.
And I was like in my phases of grieving the loss of the life I thought we would have, and the loss of the child that I thought that I, had. And, and I was like, but I need this community. I need to, I need to be able to call someone up and be like, what do I do? And if I'm the expert, then I can't ask. Like it just,
people are going to you instead of,
And I mean, again, like we were within weeks of her diagnosis. So I was like, yeah, no. And I think I kind of took that, and I'm the type of, when at 13 months, when she lost her verbal language, I was like, this is Rett syndrome. I learned everything I could about it. I pushed to get her diagnosis, which is why we did get her diagnosis within, 7 to 9 months, where normally it would have taken much longer.
Like how much longer?
She didn't technically meet clinical criteria. So it probably would have been another year to year and a half before they would have really called it Rett. But I pushed to get the genetic testing because I was like, there's nothing else that does this.
And can you give a quick summary just for people who don't know, Catalina?
Yeah, of a summary of Rett. Yeah. So Rett is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it is caused by a known mutation in a gene that's called MECP2 that sits on the X chromosome. And because girls have 2 X chromosomes, one of them is normal functioning and the other one is the mutated one. And that's why you see it mostly in girls, because boys only have 1 X chromosome. They have 1 X and 1 Y. And so in boys, every X chromosome that they have in their body has a mutation. So they tend to be much more severe, although there can be, reasons that it's variable. So anyways, it's a disorder primarily in girls. They develop normally for the first 6 to 18 months of life, and then they start to lose skills. So they lose their verbal language. They lose any function of their hands or their arms. And their hands become in the stereotypic hand pattern. So they can't actually volitionally do anything with their hands or arms for themselves. And they also, a lot of them lose the ability to walk if they ever gained it. So the walking is in kind of that gross motor area. So they'll have gross motor loss no matter where they were in their development. So that regression happens somewhere in the first, year to year and a half of life. And then they seem to stabilize. They're not really gaining developmentally at a normal pace anymore, but they're no longer losing. Then around 3 to 5 years of life, they start getting a lot of the medical complications that come along with Rett. So the majority of them develop seizures. They start getting bad scoliosis. They have trouble gaining weight, and so they're pretty frail. And so any illness that we get that we're like, oh, I have a cold, it's such a pain, they're in the hospital with pneumonia. And so they develop this kind of complex medical pattern somewhere in the 3 to 7 years of age. And from there on, it really depends on how severe their presentation is. Catalina was really fortunate that she doesn't have a lot of the medical stuff. So she didn't develop seizures. She didn't get scoliosis. She grew to have good, healthy weight. So she doesn't get sick every winter. And so then they get to this plateau phase and they are stable until kind of late adolescence, early adulthood, where they have what we call a late motor regression. So they start to just kind of slow down. They get some Parkinson-like features. They lose some of their facial expression, and But the reality is that when Catalina was diagnosed, the average lifespan for someone with Rett was in their early 20s, and so we didn't know much about what happened because there were very few that lived. Now that we know how to better medically manage, we know that these kids get a heart arrhythmia that was the cause of death of many individuals, and we know how to better treat their pneumonias. They are living into their 30s, 40s, 50s, and there's even some individuals in their 60s. So we're kind of learning as we go about what life with Rett looks like into adulthood.
And how old is Catalina today?
She's 18.
18.
And she just graduated from high school, correct? Or
she just graduated from high school.
And brain function, she's smart, she does school, she does all that stuff. How does she do that communication wise?
Yeah. So she, I always say for Catalina, she's cognitively age appropriate. It's just getting that out because she's nonverbal. She can't use her hands, so she can't type or point or sign. So everything is through her eye gaze.
And she's got such pretty eyes.
She's got those beautiful blue eyes with long lashes.
She does.
So she uses a computer that has a little video camera at the bottom that reads her eyes. So her eyes function as the mouse. So where she looks on the screen, it can activate. And then the computer has a speech generating component.
And what are her main interests?
She has really enjoyed writing. So she had worked on writing like young kids stories in high school. And also she worked with a music therapist and has written 2 songs.
Oh, cool.
And she wrote the lyrics and helped to kind of compose the musical part of them as well.
Back to the diagnosis. From what I've witnessed in my own family, they talk about mother's intuition, and I've seen it. Yes, you're in the medical profession, but it's the same thing. You knew immediately. And what a gift. And there's something to that mother's intuition, and you got to listen to it. Somehow they know. That's pretty special.
Yeah, and actually when I brought her to the pediatrician, when we got back from that trip and she wasn't talking and I finally had a day off to get her in, or a half day post call, the pediatrician was like, Dominique, you're a neurotic doctor trying to diagnose your kid with these horrible diseases, just like kids develop at different ages, and you're raising her bilingual. That's why she lost her verbal language. And I was like, that's wrong.
Right.
Like, you don't lose language from being bilingual. And it was definitely that being brushed off. But fortunately, because I was in medicine and because I did know enough, and I knew enough people that I could just switch providers and, find a different pediatrician and get that work
I'm
up.
interested in the support around you back then, but even now. This is kind of philosophical. You're in a situation where the Rett Foundation is trying to find a cure. So there's that scientific part of you that's trying to find a cure. But then are there people also kind of preaching to you acceptance and her world's great? It's different than when you thought it was going to be, that her world's great. How do you balance those on top of the people who might have some of these alternative medicine stories and are like, oh, if you go to this remote village, the shaman can fix this? Like, how do you balance all those different worlds and stay patient with people? And as a family, what's the best support for you guys? Not just now, but when you were young, when you were a young mom, 2 other toddlers, life is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone accepts news differently, right? And realities differently. And I would say there's certainly been a shift. I'll call them the older generation, the individuals that are in their mid to late 20s and older. Their parents grew up in an era where there was no research, there was no talk of treatment. They didn't even know the gene. Most of these kids never had the genetic workup because the gene wasn't known. The gene wasn't discovered until 99. So they kind of grew up in an era of just take your kid home and love them. And so they weren't seeking treatments and cures. And, and they said, I would never wish this on my child. I would never wish this on anyone else, but I accept her for who she is. And so they have kind of that perspective. Although now that we do have an FDA approved treatment, they of course try it. They're willing to help their child live an easier life. Then you have kind of this generation that grew up knowing what the gene is. And there was this really, well done animal study that showed that even in late stage mice that have the mutation in the same gene, if you can get the gene to turn back on or give it back, that you can really reverse the syndrome in mice. And so that, which happened right before Catalina's diagnosis, so that was 2007, that really changed the mindset to we can cure this disease, which I think has actually created, it makes it really hard because then parents are living for a reality that wasn't scientifically there yet. Just because we fixed it in a mouse, I can't tell you how many millions of mice have been cured of every disease on this planet, but we just can't get that to translate into humans. And so there's been it's this balance of supporting parents where they are and giving them hope that we're working to improve the lives of their loved one with Rett syndrome. And we really have talked about this kind of care and cure. We can do both. We can help you where you are today while pushing really hard to where the science is. And we're fortunate that today we have one FDA-approved drug, and there are 2 different gene therapy clinical trials that are entering their phase 3 trial at the end of this year. They'll be entering their phase 3 studies.
I like that, care and cure. I mean, I think that with these rare diseases, as a parent, that's all you can hope for at this time.
And I didn't really touch on kind of the alternative. I mean, I think people grasp for whatever they can find. And it's, you can go online and say, like, Catalina's been gluten-free since she was 2, because there was a study, it may decrease neuroinflammation. And I was like, okay, in a disease where 80% of the kids are going to get seizures, I'll do what I can. And she had really bad reflux, and it helped her reflux. So she was gluten-free, dairy-free. And so people grasp for what's in their control. When everything in your life feels out of control, you try to find what you can. Yep. And actually, just this morning on the Rett syndrome group, I was watching someone blend up their placenta, their next kid's placenta, to feed their kid with Rett, because they feel like that helps their kid. So people will find different ways to feel like they are making a difference.
And then this speaks to, we're all in the same community, the benefit of living in a small community. I'm kind of thinking about your other kids, where everybody knows the Colletons, everybody knows your situation. Do you think that's been very helpful for your kids growing up, that they don't have to explain it all the time? Like, everybody knows?
Absolutely. When we moved from Minneapolis back to the DC area, we moved to Bethesda. And we started coming in the summers a few years later, when the kids were a tiny bit older. And at the end of one summer, Kevin was like, why are we going back to Bethesda? And I was like, because the kids are enrolled in school there, and I walk to work in Bethesda, and you work in DC. And he was like, yeah, but this is our village. Like, this is our family's village. And he was really right. I don't always admit that he's right, but for that one, he was definitely right. And it has been, I think, such a life-changing place for our family to grow up, because everyone knows everyone takes care of everyone. And as you say, like, no one has to explain. There's no like, oh yeah, we can't do that because Catalina's having a bad day. It's just, it is what it is. Everyone knows Kat and kind of accepts her for who she is, and the kids for who they are and what they can do within our family limits. And I think it's also given them opportunities to be able to do more despite a lot of Catalina's needs.
Right. But I'll say on the flip side of that, what Catalina and others in the community have given the rest of us, you can't put into words, right? Yeah. Because knowing, quietly knowing and quietly watching, seeing her walk, it's like I get goosebumps, right? Because I know the struggle for her to get there. And it's motivating to the rest of us, but it's not like, everyone stops and it's like throwing confetti and stuff. It's just quietly supporting, because we love her. We love you guys. We don't love Kevin, but we love the rest of you. But the gift that we've gotten from her, you can't put a price on or words to it. It's pretty special.
So how did your career shift, and how did you start first getting involved in Rett's Foundation?
Yeah. So while I was at NIH, I had gotten to know the chief science officer at the International Rett Syndrome Foundation pretty well. His name was Steve Kaminsky. And one day I got, an email in my inbox that said, Steve Kaminsky's retiring. And I was like, what? What are they going to do? Like, he came from a place that really brought the Rett field, quite a bit forward from where it had been before he joined. And I just remember sitting in my office at work, like not that I was checking my personal email at work, but
Never.
Now I'm distracted thinking about this. And I was like, maybe I could do that. At this point, I felt like I was well established in clinical research, in rare disease research, in translating therapeutics from the bench to the bedside. And I felt like I actually have a skill set that fits right where the field is, and I may be able to help advance the field. And so I called Steve on my way home from work and was like, tell me a little bit about the job. And he was like, I already put your name in the hat.
Stop. Oh, that's great.
Which I don't know if he really did, but that's what he said. And so we had a few conversations so that I could understand, because for me, I was like, look, I'm on this treadmill. Like academic medicine, which granted I was at NIH, but it's still, you're like pushing for the next. You're like, okay, I finally got myself established. Like I'm on the speaker circuit at the conferences. Like, okay, now I'm known as like the expert in these areas. And so I'm invited to universities to present and at the big meetings. And I'm, the author on these public. I was like, if I do this, I am literally stepping off the treadmill and might not be able to get back on. And what if I don't like it? Like I've given up the last 2 decades of my life. And what if I don't like it? And again, I was really fortunate. I had an awesome mentor at NIH who was like, do it. Just do it. We're here. And also I was really fortunate that she allowed me to keep a part-time appointment. And actually, ironically, she's in the pediatric oncology division. I helped to support her program. And so I've maintained an appointment in the pediatric oncology division at NIH since I left there in 2019. I'm still seeing, I still do protocol patients with her. So that allowed me to step off the treadmill and veer into this new path, with a mission of really advancing the field to get us to the place that we can have multiple therapeutics for Rett syndrome.
And all this is while you're still mothering 3 teenagers, with the 2 younger ones have an incredibly busy sports schedule, and you still have a social life, and you still get out and play tennis and pickleball every once in a while.
Yeah. So when I left NIH to go to the Rett Foundation, the kids were 9, 11, and 13.
So when I saw you walking this week at 6:30 in the morning, I was doing my research on weighted vests, and I was like, is Dominique listening to music, a podcast, or is she on a business, a work call? I was like, I'm curious what it was. I was listening to the advice from Heron Dixon, who told me I should go with no headphones. So I was out there with no headphones, but I was like, I bet you she's talking to some scientist in China or something.
Yeah. I use, for the most part, my walk time is with music. And it is really, I grew up when I would run, I always listened to music. It was just, I always had music. I had music when I studied. I would blare music when I was in the car. It was kind of my background that allowed me to think. And so often, I'll get back, I don't even know what I listen to, but I get back and I'm like, okay, here are 85 new to-dos, or I came up with a solution for, how to solve a challenge that we've been having, or, a new kind of advisory board that I'm going to put together. So it is music.
Okay. What can we expect from the Rett Foundation? What's going on now? What's your 10-year, 20-year dreams?
Yeah. I would say my 10 to 20 year dream is that Rett syndrome is a disease that has multiple different approaches to treat it, that all build synergistically upon each other, to allow those that have Rett syndrome to live a life with kind of less constraints, so more independence and more ability, and less kind of dependence on an adult around them, and I would say we are we are building towards it. There's still a lot of work that we have to do, and there'll be a lot of failures along the way. But I really do think that if we continue to invest and build the ecosystem and continue to fuel it, along with the scientific advancements that are happening outside of the Rett field, but that, I view myself as a connector. I kind of pull stuff in as I see it, like, okay, this is relevant. We need to pull this into Rett. I think that we'll be able to get to that vision in, maybe 20 years.
How do you communicate with different fields? That's one thing about science and medicine, is something might be really cool going on, like some in my job's surgery, like the ENTs might be using this instrument that would be perfect for hand surgery, but we would never know because we're not doing ENT surgery. So how do the research communities, how do they communicate? How do you make sure that we're not too isolated in our own little bubbles?
That was something that I felt like I started to really pick up on when I worked at NIH the first time. Because I actually worked at NIH, went to the Rett Foundation, and back to NIH in a different capacity, and am now back at the Rett Foundation as of a month ago. But the first time I worked there, because we would manage these complex patients. And so we would really do these visits where I would have all the different specialists. I would connect with them all to try to figure out. And it was really cool because it'd be like, oh, the CCR4 receptor is mutated in this patient, which really then impacts this. And talk to the rheumatology colleagues to say, well, you've got the drugs that impact, and so it taught me a lot of connecting and bringing the right people together. And I expanded that when I was there to bringing in the regulatory agencies so that I could figure out how to better do a clinical trial in these rare diseases, and bringing in the pharma companies who had the money or had the drugs. And that, I feel, is a big part of my role as a chief science officer at the International Rett Syndrome Foundation, because I try to connect the different fields. So when I see it, I bring in, the chromatin researcher, but the one, the researcher that actually knows the mouse, so that when we do the behavioral studies, as well as, the company that maybe has a drug asset that's relevant to, that area that we're studying. And so it's about creating the opportunities, which of course means money, so creating funding opportunities that allows the different types of researchers to be able to work together. So that was one of the things that I built when I was with the International Rett Syndrome Foundation. The first time was building these kind of consortium grants where you could bring these different minds that wouldn't otherwise be in the same room, and accelerate that learning and the advancement.
Wow. So and this might be a tough question to even answer, but since 2019, when you were a part of the Rett Foundation, has any of your work, have you seen that reflected in CAT's progress? Is there anything specific that you've seen, and how fulfilling is that?
Yeah. Science takes a long time. And so it's hard. And that's one of the hardest things is from the time you make the early investment to the time that it's kind of in someone's hand, when you're talking about drug development, it's a decade. So like she was in a phase 2 clinical trial in 2014, and then did the phase 3 clinical trial in 2021, and the drug finally got approved in 2023. But she wasn't in the first phase 2. Like there was a whole group of patients that did, because they did it in adults first. So it took 11 years. And this was a drug that they already had the research to know that it worked in Rett. And they already had it as a viable drug that you could, bring to humans. And so it really takes a long time. But what I've seen, like the gene therapy work, that work has been through my lifetime with the International Rett Syndrome Foundation, as well as a lot of the work that I've done is in ensuring that the landscape is amenable to successful clinical trials. So while it doesn't directly benefit Catalina, it means that the clinical trials that we're doing are better and more likely to then show the success. So when you do a clinical trial, because you're testing to see if a drug or some sort of intervention works or not, if it has efficacy, and it might fail because whatever you're testing did not have efficacy, but it might fail for a lot of other reasons too. And so a lot of the work that I've done is to make sure that those other reasons are not the reasons that will fail in clinical trials, that the only reason they'll fail is because the drug doesn't actually work. And so it helps so that when Catalina does do these clinical trials, she's in trials that are better designed to then be able to show if it truly is successful or not.
That's encouraging. And it's, what a gift to get to watch that progress, as you said, even though it does take forever.
With you started off in research, you did a ton of research, you did a ton of patient care. Now you're a leader. Double question, what's your leadership style? But also, do you miss kind of doing the bench work?
Yeah, in terms of leadership style, I would say I like to have great teams with great minds and let people do their job. So I'm not a micromanager, but I'm a connector and a more of like the vision setter. And I want to be surrounded by really, really great people and trust those people.
And do you miss kind of the old days when you were at all like actually doing, because I assume you're not doing much of the hands-on research now, you're more leading. Right. Do you miss that at all? Like any of the...
I would say I certainly don't miss the bench research. And that's a natural progression actually for any researcher. They're the ones like, first pipetting and then like, moving on to kind of more complex tasks. And then when they are the, independent investigator in their own lab, then they have other people doing the work. And so it is kind of a natural progression in research. And I don't miss that hands-on lab work. And I love that I can dabble in areas that I know enough to be dangerous, and then surround myself by really smart researchers who can course correct me when I come up with crazy ideas. Like, well, why don't you guys pursue this? And they're like, yeah, it won't make sense.
Why don't you take a 1987 Toyota Land Cruiser and redo it in your garage?
Yes, terrible idea. And the number of brain cells that I've lost from the paint fumes that are coming up.
And do you still get the random like social event dermatology questions?
100%. They're like, let me take off my shirt at the party,
The future is unknown, but it's bright for Rhett. The future is bright for Kata. I just love her spirit, and I love that you're such a part of it as a mom, but also putting your brains behind it as well, because I still think you're smarter than Ty.
With Kevin and all his crazy hobbies that we went over, do you have any hobbies like that? Like, what is your, I need to relax with a busy job and teenagers?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is like, there's only time for one of us to take on crazy hobbies. And he seems to like rapidly move from one to the next. So I never really get to.
It's like Ty with the questions. He's like doubles up, so you can't
exactly.
get anything in there.
Can't get anything in there.
Does he let you drive the RV?
I drive the RV.
Okay.
Yes, he drives it into rocks. I drive it on the road.
Okay.
That's for another day. I think my outlet is like tennis and pickleball and mahjong and doing my walk. Now, fortunately, since the kids are older, we can both, do our morning exercise. I am definitely a morning person, and I like to get up at 5, have my own time. Unfortunately, he decided after forever being kind of a late start person that he would want the early morning too. But it's nice when he has hobbies because then he gets out of there really quick and I get to have my morning.
He's been cramping your style for a long time. I've warned you.
And then I'm fascinated by are you saying your lateral malleolus was broken, or are you saying they took it out? Like you don't have one, and then you still played 3 sports in high school, 2 sports in college? Any ankle stability problems at all? Awesome. So when you see about these like NFL players, like they break their ankle and they go out, or they have a high ankle sprain, you must be like, what is wrong with these?
I don't even have, part of the ankle, and I could do all this.
Okay. Where did this determination come from? Like you were just born with it? You
I was
inherited it?
probably born with it.
Okay.
I would say my dad probably has quite a bit of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell him that you can't do something and he'll prove you wrong.
Okay.
Wow.
Awesome.
Dominique, this has been so great and so enlightening. I've just enjoyed it. I enjoy hearing you speak about this, and I love that you'd be able to put your passions with your passion of your family. So it's very cool.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you guys.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you very much. And hopefully people learn something about Rhett's, and they obviously learn something about being busy.